Hi, this is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this week, coming to us from the Chicago area, is Hersh Rephun. And I normally know that you're not supposed to say this about a guest. You're not supposed to say they're funny before they come on, and especially on a show about death. But I don't care. I think being funny and being nice are tantamount to angelic, and so this man achieves both. I was actually a guest on his show, and that's how we met. And I will strongly encourage my listeners to head over to Spotify or whatever their favorite place is to listen to a podcast and check out Truth Tastes Funny. He is a person in both comedy and advertising, and he's also a stand-up comedian. Above all, as a brand storyteller, Hersh operates on one simple principle: sell the truth. And so with no further delay, how are you?
I'm good, Mike. Wow, that's great. Thank you for that introduction and for the pressure that it puts on me. But that's all right. That's all right. But I do agree with your assessment of the place of humor and all of that. I don't know how I would converse about any serious topic without humor being part of the equation.
Yeah, and I mean, your biography is outstanding. And oh, by the way, did I get it right that you're in the Chicago area?
Yeah, I'm in Iowa City.
Cool. So actually, I would love to start with comedy. My favorite thing in the entire world to do is see stand-up comics. I support local, I support international, and I support, of course, domestic, all types of comedy. I love it all. I go regularly to clubs and all that. So when did you ever do your very, very, very first stand-up performance? And can you kind of tell us about that part of your career?
My first stand-up performance was in 1992. I was in my early 20s at the time, and I was living in New York, which was obviously a great place if you wanted. There were no like open mics and stuff. It was just you went to a club and you put your name on a list and you waited until you got your turn, and the more you showed up, the earlier they would put you up as long as you were getting better. But there was no like make-believe kind of practice show or anything. It was a real show. And being New York, the clubs were open till like 3 a.m. or so. So, you could wait around till 2 or 2:30, and there still might be a crowd. So it was kind of a amazing setup. And I through a friend of mine, I got to get on the list at the comic strip on the Upper East Side, and I went in there and I waited and I did like everybody else. And then the guy said to me, "You're next, you're next." And I was about to go up, and I didn't even have a lot of material. I was going to get 5 minutes, and I figured foolishly, for me, it was more about the courage to go up, but I figured foolishly that I could improvise jokes because I'm so funny, and I could do some impressions, and I would what's 5 minutes? I've been funny for 23 years. Why would I need to
Yeah.
write anything? And so I'm about to go up, and and the manager of the club puts his hand on my chest and stops me, and Eddie Murphy walks in and does a drop in and proceeds to go on the stage and kill for 45 minutes. And it's got to be like 2:15 in the morning by the time he's
God.
done. And then the guy says, "Okay, you'll go up as soon as Eddie finishes." And I'm about to go through this, like through the archway into the room, and Richard Lewis, the comedian Richard Lewis, is standing there. No, he didn't go on. He had already gone on. He was just watching. He was watching Eddie, but he was leaning against the doorpost in front of me with his hand on with his like fingers on his forehead like he does, and he said, "I wouldn't do it."
Oh, okay.
and I went and did it, and I did some silly things, and I mean, had I had an amazing 5 minutes, it would not have really mattered very much. And in those days, people didn't have cell phones, and they weren't taking pictures and tweeting and doing all that stuff. They were just mesmerized and then stunned, because this was Eddie Murphy, and this was, the 1992. So it was like, and and I had met Eddie Murphy when I was 16. I was in Israel for a year of study abroad, and he was filming Best Defense was the movie that he was filming Best Defense with Dudley Moore, and we heard that he was in town and he was filming a movie and he was at a hotel, and I called the hotel and spoke to his manager, and they said, yeah, you know, it would probably be nice for him to have some American fans, you know, say hi. He goes to set at like 6 a.m., come to the hotel at 6 a.m. And we went, a bunch of us, to the hotel at 6 a.m., or we went probably at 5. We waited, finally came down and got his autograph and talked to him and met him. It was fun. It was funny. But, you know, I didn't talk to him that night, and nor would I have brought that up. He was very nice when I was 16 and met him. But yeah, so that was my trial by fire. And I kind of bombed, although, you know, I think that the fact that I did it was more important than anything, and that I went up, and then I learned that I have to write. And I started writing characters and, you know, voices and things like that.
Technically speaking, you could tell people that that you closed an Eddie Murphy show.
Eddie Murphy opened for me. I've never used that. I've never used that line, but Eddie Murphy opened for me.
Also, the Richard Lewis thing is pretty cool. So that's awesome. It's cool that you were in New York City and all that. And because of the time constraints on the show, I'm gonna jump like a huge topic over. But let's get like serious just for a little bit about life and death and philosophy and all that. So I'm going to kind of set it up for our audience that you're a family man and you have a great family, and I follow you online and I see a lot of your posts, and you're just like a very gregarious, nice, kind individual. I'm curious, along the great calamity that is life, what was like one of your more serious moments, and how did that change you and help you? Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
The most serious moment was when my father died, and I was 29 or 28, turning 29, and my first wife was pregnant with our daughter, and it was, you know, he had not taken the greatest care of himself. He had diabetes. He was always struggling to kind of, you know, avoid the sweets and the things he's not supposed to indulge in, and it just kind of ate away at him to where he didn't, you know, he suffered a stroke and was in the hospital and was in a coma for like a week or two. But, you know, I don't even think at that moment that I registered how traumatic it was, because of course it's traumatic. I was young and he was young, and, you know, my mom was going to be, you know, lost her partner in life, and my sisters lost it. We were all very close as a family. So I think it was such a shock that and then here I was, I had like 2 little boys and a girl on the way, and was already overwhelmed. I was like overwhelmed with life. All that stuff was a lot to have going on at such a young age. So I think I think to whatever extent I handled it, I think it was very, very serious. And it also did make me think about, for the first time, really what happens when somebody dies. You know, my uncles, my father's brother, my uncle, who thank God is still alive. He's about 96 now. And I remember asking him, well, you know, what in Judaism, what's our understanding of what happens, right? Like, somebody dies, obviously the physical body isn't there anymore. And he said, you know, our understanding is that the soul is, you know, during this time of mourning, the Shiva period of 7 days of mourning, and that's the point at which I was in. So, you know, our understanding is that the soul hovers close to the body and to where the body was and the home and all of that, because it's in a state of confusion. And I said, well, if the brain is gone, if technically the brain is no longer functioning, how does the soul think? Like, what's the language? What does it talk? Right? You watch these movies where ghosts speak in English. How is that accomplished? Right? And he said it's not language as we understand it. It's a tether. He said, in the sense that everything that impacts the soul while we are alive on earth registers in the soul. So, there doesn't have to be a language. They're not, telling us something in English. It's the best we can understand it is that the soul exists, the soul continues, and it is impacted, which means that, if you loved somebody or were somebody's, parent or part of their DNA, that you would still presumably feel that connection as you would to the home and the environment and the atmosphere that your body was impacting on your soul for, 70 years, whatever it might be.
Do you live your life according to the tenets of that wisdom?
Yeah, I think I have, although I think we tend to humanize all the elements that we don't understand, which makes sense. I still think of both my parents have passed now, and I do think of them as being cognizant. I don't, because I can't relate to the impacted soul thing. That's a lot of work. I mean, that's like there are filmmakers and writers who can kind of do that quite well, but I find it a struggle to conceptualize it that way. But I do feel, listening to your show, where you had the guest who had the pre-birth experience,
Christian Sundberg, yeah.
Christian, yeah. So I totally, like, that to me makes so much sense. The idea that and also that there is a way of messaging us from beyond, because it's, and how it's accomplished. I mean, how is anything accomplished? How are you go back to, like, and I'm sure you hear this a lot, the biology, the human biology, any biology. How is that accomplished, right? So it's pretty complex.
I want to attach the Eddie Murphy story to what you just explained. I imagine as you're sitting there in New York about to get on for your first performance, and then Eddie Murphy walks in, you're not only starstruck, but you're also like, oh, he's where I want to be, and I'm here now. This is, like, palpable. This is realistic. I'm curious, now that you're 20 years removed from that experience, or maybe 30, how much is, like, ambition and goal orienting versus, like, where you are now and how content you are? Like, how would you explain that to your children and to, like, I'm like 10 years younger than you, to just to anyone? Like, how is that process for you?
Yeah, it really is changing for me. I think you're absolutely right. At that moment, all I could feel was, I want to be in a different place. I want to be in this place. I want to be, and that held true every step of the way. Like, I was in the bar at Stand Up New York, I remember, which was another club that I did quite frequently as I was starting out. And at this bar were Dennis Leary, Colin Quinn, guys like that, Dave Attell, Dave Chappelle, Louis C.K., and those guys are more or less my age, Louis C.K. maybe, I don't know. Wasn't that big an age difference, if at all. And the other guys were a little older. And I'm like looking at those guys and I'm going, okay, I have to be literally in that spot. I got to get to that spot. But somehow my priorities were different. So, they were either not married, not having kids, not observant. I was still observant, Jewishly, to the point where I wouldn't work on the Sabbath. It was a big handicap. I joke that the two most important things in my home were laughter and not becoming a comedian. It's like you're so funny, and you know, and you can write, and you can perform, and you can sing, and you can dance, and you can do all these things, but you can't work on Shabbos. You can't work on the Sabbath. And I was going to write a book. I started writing a book. I haven't finished it, but I started writing a book called Movie Stars Don't Work on Shabbos. I basically felt at the time that I was making this decision to do whatever I was going to do within the confines of my religious and family commitments. But I didn't do that with with a real happiness about it. I did. I was like, okay, well, this is the hand I've been dealt, or this is the commitment I've made, and so I'll have to figure it out. And so I would always look at these people who were unbridled in their pursuit of their dreams in comedy or entertainment, and I would feel like I had to settle for something a little bit different.
Well, that really resonates with me, and I'm starting to see that about my own life, that like where some people I know didn't get the family, didn't do X, they got Y, and meanwhile I don't want Y at the expense of my family X.
Right.
I'll never know. You know, I'm already here. I'm already at this intersection of the decisions I've made. And actually, speaking of decisions we've made, I hope my mother-in-law, who sometimes listens to these, isn't offended by the following phrasing of the question, but why and when did you give up the Orthodox shtick?
Did you call it shtick?
I did, just to be funny to my mother-in-law.
Release this episode Saturday, and you won't have to worry about it. Oh, yeah. Well, my sisters are Orthodox. I mean, I'm very connected to my faith. I think what made, so your question was what made me decide to kind of loosen up on the Orthodox. Yeah. So when would be when I was like 32 and I was getting divorced from my first wife, and the divorce didn't have anything to do with religious observance per se. It was that we were very young when we got married. We clashed quite a bit. I just saw the writing on the wall that, you know, we were not happy, and it didn't seem like the things we were doing, having a lot of kids and, you know, trying to get along. But, you know, it felt like the whole thing was very constricting. And I think when I decided that I didn't want, that it was better for my kids, and we had 3 kids together and we were married 10 years, when I realized that it was better for my kids to go through the difficulty of a divorce but have 2 parents who could still find happiness than to be around parents who were always going to be worsening in their relate. You know, it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. If it's the wrong match, it's only going to get worse. So I figured it was, but that stepping into myself was where I was like, yeah, you know, I could be, I'm a little constrained overall. I feel like I've never felt entirely comfortable with all of these observances and restrictions and limitations. And then, you know, when I met my wife, my current wife, who was not Jewish when we met, and I was still doing all the things that I would do, and she was interested in Judaism, and she would explore those things as well. But the clash with Orthodoxy, with the attitudes of, you know, the Orthodox needs for people to, you know, to be so restrictive, I just couldn't. I was going the other way. You know, I couldn't say to her, I need you to do all these different things, because I couldn't really say that I wanted to do a lot of them. So it was at that time, and I kind of started gravitating toward a more relaxed lifestyle, although still respecting, you know, my ex-wife and her observances and how my kids were observing, and not trying to influence them one way or another and saying, you don't have to do this or you don't have to do that, you know. And I think we're very happy with how our 3 kids together have grown up and matured and made, you know, decisions for themselves. And, you know, so I think in the end, she remarried. She had she had two more kids. I remarried. We have two girls. So it's, I think that you kind of know in your system what feels honest to you. And that's the best barometer you can use. Not the fallout, not the relationships that may be strained, not the judgment that people are almost certainly going to have, but the peace within you, which goes, Mike, back to your statement about the goals that we have professionally. Sometimes I never really resented anyone else, but I would beat myself up for a long time for doing what I perceived as settling, right? But I still performed. I still wrote. I wrote movies that got produced. I appeared in television. I did comedy clubs all over the place. So I did do those. It's not like I sat in a box, but I didn't go big in the sense that I didn't make comedy the single most important thing in my life. And like you said, I wouldn't change that now. But now I've realized that a lot of the work that I did with brands and helping brands find themselves honestly and find their voice and, sell the truth. And that whole thing, none of that stuff happened by accident. I became known for that stuff because I was good at it and I liked it. So,
Yeah.
doing the when I started doing my Truth Tastes Funny podcast, I was writing a stage show, cabaret show called Truth Tastes Funny, which I will still do. Although now I think maybe I'll have a following from the podcast that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So, everything happens for a reason. But I do often look at those people who had put all that stuff first and did all the career stuff, boom, 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 and then they look around and they didn't do the family stuff or they didn't do it wholeheartedly. And now they are too stuck to kind of even change or to find it or to do it, or it's just kind of, a little bit incomplete. And I feel like, well, I'm really blessed. I have, fortunately, that complete picture, and I'm doing it kind of in reverse. Now I'm in really, really super high gear on my career, and and that is, where I'm at.
That's incredible. And you're so good at explaining it all. And I am curious, you call yourself a brand storyteller. I understand what that means through the context of knowing you, but how would you explain that to someone on an airplane?
I would say to somebody, I use brand storyteller because it does evoke the two elements that are going to need to be explained. In other words, they're not going to say, oh, brand storyteller, great, awesome. They're going to say, oh, what does that mean? You work with brands, you kind of tell their stories. And, for a long time, I would say I was a creative. That is technically someone who's a copywriter is a creative. But the other thing that I realized was I never worked in-house at an agency. I never had one single title that limited me to, and for a while I was like, well, how do I explain to people that I do stand-up comedy and I sometimes write ads and I sometimes write press releases or PR, do PR for clients or brands. And sometimes I write their entire, image portfolio of how they present themselves. It's like, I realized that these things are all me. That's why I didn't become Eddie Murphy, because I became me. And so, if I had tried to become Eddie Murphy, I probably wouldn't succeed at that because he's already Eddie Murphy. So I ultimately became me, which is a hybrid creative person who uses I use my imagination and my ability to respond and to hear what people are saying to me to give them, ways to express their brand personality. But I feel like those conversations that I have about who his brand is and what it, that's why I'm starting this new podcast called Yes Brand, where I will have business owners, entrepreneurs, CEOs come on and talk to me about their brands and tell me about their successes and their failures and maybe where they're stuck or they can't get to the next level, and have fun, but always with the jokes, like the jokes that I throw out when you came on my show, the jokes that I throw out in any circumstance are going to be my reaction. I'm going to think of something funny or that attempts to be funny, and sometimes it'll be funny and sometimes it won't, and that also can be funny. But it doesn't mean that every campaign is funny. That's the other part. It means that humor is a part of the life process.
Well, that's a great quote in itself. Humor is a part of the life process. I have two very, very quick questions, and then I want to give you the floor. What is, like, in your estimation, one of the funniest movies of all time? So you don't have to say the funniest, but one of them. And then also, who is a currently performing comic that you still admire and would recommend people check out?
Funniest movie? Okay, yeah, there is no funniest movie. I have to go with Blazing Saddles. And you know who I admire, who I just saw in concert here in Iowa City, Mark Maron. And I wasn't a fan. He started out a little before me. I actually did a show with him at Boston University in, I don't know, when we were both he was in his late 20s, I was in my mid 20s. And but it was like mispromoted in that there was some big campus event. It was a Saturday night. There was a big campus event. And the promoter was new to promoting comedy, and we both got paid $450 to do the show, so we got paid either way. But there was like literally no one showed up, no one in this big auditorium. But I started listening to his podcast, and then I became very into his comedy and his point of view. And my wife and I went to see him at the Angler Theater here in Iowa City a few weeks ago, and he was phenomenal.
Cool. Well, I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. To end the show, as you know, I always just let people kind of give their peaceful message to the world. So what would you like to say to my audience?
Okay. I have two things I want to say. First, I want to say that I read your book, Too True to Be Good, and I loved that book. I was irritated, and I was uncomfortable, and I was at times just queasy, but I read it all over my summer vacation where we went away to my sister-in-law's lake house and had time to read, and I read the whole book. I couldn't put it down, and so kudos on that. So I just wanted to let you know. And knowing you a little bit better and knowing a little more about you, I see a lot of things in the book that, make sense where they came from, listening to your podcast and some of your guests. So very, very cool.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
My message is all about Positronics, what I call Positronics. We have this chain reaction that happens and that is desired. People will inflame us and or gaslight us or just cry out. It's really a cry out for not just attention, but for love, right? These crazy people, these people out there who say all this hateful stuff, who tell all these ridiculous, painful, hurtful lies, are what they really are missing is love. And we're not going to solve the problems of the world by giving them love, but we certainly can improve things by putting love out there and opening our hearts and opening our minds to all the possibilities that your guests talk about on this show about what could happen after you die is a really good example of open-mindedness. But we also should take that same open-mindedness and think about, what happens when you're alive. And I think that's the message. What happens when you're alive? Well, let's try to make that the most pleasant and loving and fulfilling experience we can and give the fear a rest. I would propose that we address all of our fears, biases, prejudices, and judgments in the afterlife. Let's save it for the afterlife.
Yeah, I love it. I agree. I think it's very, very profound, and it's great advice. And also, yeah, it's true. There's not actually like a hurry to address it. And then if you were to die and it wasn't even there, then it would have been a waste anyway. Again, everyone, his name is Hersh Rephun, and he is located in Iowa City, but he's all over the internet. There will be extensive notes for how to find him and his great show, Truth Tastes Funny. Again, thank you so much for taking time to come on our show. Thank you for being exactly who you are and for being in the universe that I share with you. And it's just amazing that thanks to technology and our passion passions, we were able to meet and share podcasts. So thank you again. Thank you to our beautiful, wonderful audience, and we will see you soon.